Now this is where Andrew Jackson's perceptions of women has to be explained. Andrew Jackson could never bring himself to believe anything evil about any woman. Andrew Jackson had, I hope no one will take offense if I should say, he had an exaggerated notion of female virtue. He had a mother who died. His father died before he was born. He never knew his father, also called Andrew Jackson. He had known his mother, but his mother died when he was 14 years old. As a result of her successful attempt to spring Andrew Jackson from a British prisoner of war camp during the American Revolution, she trekked scores of miles across the wilderness to talk the British commander of this prisoner of war camp into releasing her son. Andrew Jackson was one of the youngest soldiers, well, I wasn't formally a soldier, one of the youngest combatants in the American Revolution. He joined the American Revolution at the age of 13. He was taken prisoner at the age of 14. His mother wanted to get him out of a prisoner of war camp because prisoner of war camps in those days, as for many years, were notorious breeders of infectious disease. And cholera was running through the camp, and smallpox as well. And Jackson, in fact, caught smallpox, as did his brother, who was taken prisoner at the same time. And his mother came and rescued the boys from the prisoner of war camp. And she brought them home. On the way home, Jackson's brother died of the disease he contracted. His mother died shortly. Andrew Jackson was left alone in the world. His other brother had died as well in the war, and so he was left alone. But he had this memory of the heroic actions of his mother, a mother who would stop at nothing to save and protect her children, including Andrew Jackson. And Andrew Jackson developed these ideas, these memories of his mother that he revered and he followed for the rest of his life. One of the things his mother said was that if he were injured by any man, suffered a physical or other kind of injury, he should never sue that person at court. No, he should take it upon himself to demand redress. And she told him this when he was a young man, and what she said is, okay, if the person who beat you up or otherwise wronged you is too big for you to handle right now, well, wait a few years till you get bigger, and then go after him. And so Jackson had this notion of women as existing in the realm of saints. His wife Rachel, he put in the same category. Now, with Rachel, it was a little bit more of a problem in that Jackson, here's where the personal and the political really intersect. And Jackson fell in love with Rachel when she was married to another man. Now, her husband had abandoned her. His husband had physically abused her and then abandoned her. He was nowhere around. In those days, though, it was nearly impossible to get a divorce. The only way you could, there were no general divorce laws. To get a divorce, you had to apply to the state legislature and get them to pass a bill saying that, okay, you can divorce this person. So John Roberts can divorce Rachel Roberts. And they learned, or at least they said they learned later, that the first husband, Roberts, had applied for a divorce bill with the Virginia legislature because they had been married in Kentucky, which at that time was the western counties of Virginia. So they heard the divorce was going through. This is the story that they later told. There's reason to doubt its veracity. But anyway, they heard, or they said they heard, that the divorce was going through, so they assumed that they gave enough time for the divorce to be final, and then they became married. Except they never heard officially that the divorce had been declared final, but the Virginia legislature was meeting hundreds of miles away across the mountain, so the news took time, and anyway, it might have got lost on the way. The fact of the matter is that they fell madly in love and they got married. And this was not scandalous. at the time, not in Western Tennessee, notions regarding marriage were rather different than they are today because people disappeared and they didn't come back. They abandoned their wives, they abandoned their husbands, and what people typically did in such circumstances was take up as common law husband and wife. And that way, if the missing spouse eventually reappeared, then there was nothing formal and you could deal with it at that point. And it didn't become an issue. It wasn't an issue for a while until Jackson went into politics. And then his political enemies began saying that he had stolen another man's wife. Well, Jackson didn't take lightly to this sort of criticism, to these aspersions on his own character. But he especially didn't take lightly or warmly to the obvious implication that Rachel was an adulterer, or maybe even a bigamist. And so Jackson might have called out someone on a matter of honor for the insult against himself, but when Rachel's name was brought into it, then it really got him. That's what led to Charles Dickinson's death. It also led, in the campaign of 1828, to probably the dirtiest presidential campaign in American history. Sometimes a lot of people think that politics today is low and dirty. Politics today is patty cake compared to politics in days past. In large part now because everything that a candidate says, just about everything that a candidate thinks, or certainly anything that a candidate emails, is recorded by somebody and they know it can be used against them. But in the earlier times, nobody had tape recorders, nobody took notes, nobody had telephone cameras. So candidates could say one thing to this audience and another thing to that audience. And their spokesman could say something over here and another spokesman could say something over there. Well, the campaign against Jackson became a campaign against Rachel. And Rachel's name was dragged through the mud. She was described as a bigamist, an adulteress, a prostitute, a whore, every nasty thing that you could imagine. And Jackson, by this time, was in a position where he couldn't duel with everybody who was saying these bad things, because most of the bad things were said anonymously. It was the equivalent of sort of rumors on the internet, kind of the Matt Drudge report sort of thing. And so handbills were circulated, nobody put their names on them, and Jackson had to sort of silently suffer this stuff. And Rachel had to suffer it as well. Rachel never liked the fact that her husband went into politics. And the campaign of 1828 was emotionally devastating to her. She suffered a nervous breakdown. And then the nervous breakdown led to a physical breakdown, and she died under the strain. She died just days after Andrew Jackson was elected President of the United States. This was Jackson's moment of greatest political and personal triumph. And he suffered his deepest personal tragedy. He almost could not bring himself to go from Nashville to Washington to become president. And the only thing that finally decided him to make the trip, to accept this responsibility and honor that the American people handed him, was a desire to get back at his enemies, his political enemies, the people who had killed Rachel.